Dr. Tom Ludwig is the John Dirk Workman Professor of Psychology at Hope College. He joined the faculty in 1977. Over the next 40 years, he taught courses in developmental psychology, adult development and aging, psychology and religion, and neuroscience. He also served as adjunct faculty at Western Theological Seminary, as well as Hope's faculty exchange professor at Meiji Gakuin University in Tokyo, and as interim president of Trinity Lutheran Seminary in Bexley, Ohio. He has a BA from Concordia College, an MA from Christ Seminary Seminex, and a PhD from Washington University. So let us welcome Dr. Tom Ludwig. And by the way, I will have a microphone in the back of the room, so when it's time to ask questions or comments, just raise your hand and I'll get one to you.
We didn't do a sound check, so is this okay? Yeah. All right. So if you read the blurb, you know what I'm going to be talking about today. I want to focus, I've got a lot of material that I could share with you, but we only have limited time. So actually, this sounds a little bit loud to me. Can you? Okay, all right. I want to focus both on the challenges of aging and the joys of aging, try to do a little balance of that, with the goal being trying to get at human flourishing. What things are within our power to control that might move us a little further along that line towards aging wisely, aging well? Now, there's a contemporary quote in German. Translated, it would read something like this: "To be old is not an art, but getting there is." And that reflects what this talk is about. Now, this is based on something that Goethe wrote back in the 1700s. At the time, he was already in his 80s, so it was a little bit more negative. If we translated what he actually wrote, it would come out like this: "To be old is not an art, but there is an art to enduring it." Maybe some of you are more in line with that quote than the contemporary quote, but I prefer the contemporary quote. Okay, you need to know something about me. Some of you may have been here last spring when I gave some presentations on artificial intelligence. Anybody? Any of this group? Okay. And there I told you that I've had a lifelong interest in artificial intelligence that began when I was age 20. Well, I've also had a lifelong interest in aging that began even earlier. When I was born, my father was 51, my mother was 45. And so a few months after my 14th birthday, my father retired at age 65. And so I spent those crucial high school formative years in the home of a retired couple. My friends had parents in their 30s or 40s. My parents were in their 50s and then into 60s by the time I was in college. So this had a lifelong effect on me, no question about it. And so when my initial path, I'm not going to go through my whole life history, but I was initially planning to be a professor of Hebrew. And when that life, because of the denominational issues, the denomination that I was part of, that path was blocked. And so my plan B was to go into psychology, and I selected gerontology as my field of study. Why? Because of my experience growing up, watching my parents go through the struggles and joys of aging during that important time of my life. Why were my parents so old when I was born? Well, because they had already had 11 kids. And so I'm number 12. And so in this picture from 1954, I'm the one in front on the left. And so this picture on the right was taken in 2006. It's the last time that all 12 of us were together alive. 3 of my brothers died the next year. As all boys, 3 of them died in 2007. And so that left 9 of us. 3 more have died since 2007. So there are 6 of the 12 still alive. My oldest brother is the one in the dark coat just behind me. The oldest surviving brother, he's actually number 4 in the list, but he's the oldest one that's alive, and he just turned 94. And so I've spent my life not only growing up in the home of a retired couple, but watching 11 older siblings move decade by decade through the lifespan. And they made some mistakes. And I didn't have to make those mistakes because I learned from their mistakes. But they also showed me good models of how to live each stage of life. And now 6 of them, obviously, are older than I am. And so I'm still watching them and seeing what they do and what works and what doesn't seem to work. Okay, so that's my history and how I got interested in this. Last week, I was in Scotland. But you, I hope, were here with Judy, seeking wisdom on aging with the help of Shakespeare, Frost, and Cummings, and John Timmerman. And those readings brought out what I call the paradox of aging. Because when we look at the reality of aging, there's loss, right? There's physical loss, cognitive losses, social losses, financial losses in some cases. And so the paradox for me is, how can an older person face these losses, sometimes significant losses, sometimes involving chronic pain, sometimes involving disabilities, physical, cognitive disabilities that prevent them from doing all the things that they want to do, and yet still claim that all is well. In fact, if you look at surveys on life satisfaction, one of the paradoxical things is that over and over again, retired people rate their life satisfaction as higher than younger people. How can that possibly be? When, if you ask an 18-year-old, would you like to be 80? They'd say, no, that'd be terrible. And yet 80-year-olds rate their life satisfaction as higher than 18, because 18-year-olds have their own problems, right? And so they're different problems, but they have problems. So that's part of the paradox. Some people reaching advanced age can say, in spite of all these losses, all is well. I'm happy. I'm content with my life. Not only that, some of them can give thanks to God for this amazing day, each amazing day. Every day, you wake up and you're still alive. You can enjoy the world around you. That's something amazing, isn't it? And in one of your other readings, there was the quote, "To love that well which thou must leave ere long." So think about that. Getting up every day is a commitment to keep engaging in this world in spite of all the losses, in spite of all the problems, to keep engaging in this world, knowing that you're going to be leaving it. All this is going away. And yet, while you're here, you're holding on to it and loving it well. I like that imagery. I think it would be a good model for us to hold in front of us. Okay. As you look around your friends, family members, as I look to my older siblings, one of the things that's clear is there are no guarantees. Aging well is not something that people can count on. Some people do age well and are models for us, but there are a lot of people who are aging poorly. So that's another part of the paradox, right? That aging well is not guaranteed. Now, why is that? Some people believe that whether you age well or poorly is random. If you're aging well right now, you won the lottery. You were born at the right time, at the right place, to the right parents, with the right genes, and had the right environmental experiences that set you up to have a successful aging process. And then obviously, the people who are aging poorly, that was just a random luck of the draw that they got less effective genes, were born into a less conducive environment, and as a result, their life trajectory took a different course from yours. Okay, some people believe that it's all chance. Maybe it is. Others, and I imagine there's some of you in this room that would say this, that you see your life as being guided by God's providence, and that therefore the fact that you're aging well is, in a sense, a gift from God, right? It is God's blessing to you that you're living the kind of life at this particular age. Now, I certainly see my life as full of grace, and I believe that my successful aging up to this point has been part of the hand of God guiding me into certain experiences and not others, protecting me from some things that I probably would have fallen into without God's guidance. But if you believe that, that raises a problem of its own, right? Because what about the people that are aging poorly? Does that mean that God didn't give them the gift of successful aging? That God didn't guide their lives? To me, I mean, that could be true. I mean, this could be theological determinism at work, that our lives are being guided without our control, and God is choosing to give successful aging to some people and not to others. But to me, that sounds cruel. So I'd prefer to believe that God doesn't really want people to suffer as they age. And so I prefer another way of looking at it, and that is to say, to the degree that some aspects of aging are under our control, successful aging, aging well, could be thought of as a personality characteristic that can be nurtured and developed over the course of your life. It's kind of hard to start when you're 85, but if you started when you were 35 and selected certain actions and behaviors and molded your life in a particular way, that you could develop this sense of awe and wonder at each stage in your life as you move through it and come out at the end feeling pretty good as you look back on your life and saying, okay, I made some mistakes. I did some things that I'm not proud of, but overall, there's not much I would have changed because my life has has integrity to it, that it flowed in a certain way because I made these decisions and I looked to the future and I thought about what kind of person I wanted to be in my retirement years. And that is part of successful aging. It's planning ahead. And so I don't mean to blame. I mean, there are a lot of people who are in terrible circumstances without any fault of their own, right? Life has dealt them a bad hand. But to the degree that people who had a lot going for them wind up at 80 aging poorly, it could be partly their fault, right? And so I want you to think about the aspects of aging that are under your control. You need to run with that. You need to try to maximize those aspects to the best of your ability, and you'll wind up with fewer problems at each age as you go through life. Okay, now that I'm a lifelong educator, right? And so I taught my first course on aging when I was 26, by the way. I had dark hair and a dark beard, and I didn't have much credibility. People looked at me and said, what could this 26-year-old know about aging? Well, as a matter of fact, I knew a lot about aging at age 26, but I didn't convey that. But as I went through my own life course and my hair turned white and most of it fell out, I have more credibility. And so now when I talk about aging, people say, yeah, he probably knows what he's talking about, right? Because he's been there. Well, actually, a lot of what I know about aging, I knew already when I was 26. Things really haven't changed that much. That's kind of sad in a way. But I look like I know what I'm talking about now. So that's helpful in some contexts. Okay, education and training. That's why you're here, right? So this already means you have one leg up. You are on a trajectory of aging better than people that aren't making an effort to educate themselves. The ancient Greek philosophers had two terms to describe this balance between education and training: gnosis and techne. Gnosis, knowledge, and techne, skill. I think it takes both, right? So in this context, the context of my talk today, gnosis refers to the knowledge about what happens in aging and why it happens. And techne, or skill, refers to practicing certain lifestyle aspects that are going to prepare you better for the next stage of your life. Understanding why and practicing how. If you do that year by year, you're going to be on a good track for successful aging. Okay, now before I talk about my thoughts about the challenges of aging, I'm going to give you 3 minutes to turn to the people next to you and talk about this question. As you consider the next decades of your life, what worries you the most about growing older? And for the people at home, if you would just sit down and think about this for a couple of minutes and then listen to what other people have to say when we share that. Okay, go ahead. Okay, you probably have a lot more that you'd like to say, but it's time to wrap this up. Before I ask for a couple of people to share their thoughts, I'd just like to see a show of hands. If you are thinking about what worries you the most about aging, how many of you would say it's the physical aspect of aging? Put up your hand. Okay. How many of you would say it's the cognitive aspect of aging? And a few more. What about other things that don't really fit? Okay. So I'd like to hear from 2 or 3 of you. Anybody feel, like you have a good self-image today and you're willing to talk about what your group came up with? Go ahead, right here. Microphone.
Well, it's definitely cognitive decline for me because I had a memory all through school. It made me a great student, and I didn't have to write anything down. If I heard it, if I read it, I remembered it. And I always joke and say I can remember the first thing I forgot because I missed a meeting somewhere in my early 40s. And so 40s were a whole thing of realizing I had to write things down. And then I sailed through the next decades. Now, this last year has been much harder. I moved from Southern California from a house I lived in for 47 years here because my daughter lives here. We knew she'd be my end of life person. And I feel like I'm on a different planet, even though I grew up in a small town in Pennsylvania and there are things very similar here to that. I was just saying that I start every day with today is Wednesday. and I do not have dementia because it's.
And what an amazing day it is.
Because in terms of my memory, it is just not what it was and
Yeah.
not what I want it to be. So physical decline, I spent my childhood in a chair reading a book. I mean, that's so.
So you
know,
could do that
I
again.
can do that again.
Yeah.
And other losses of people, I mean, that just goes with getting old, and those, as long as I have my memory, I can remember them. I have photo albums. I can enjoy all of that. So,
But only if you remember what the photos are depicting. Yes. Somebody else. Yes.
My main concern is physical decline. I'm 82, so it's pretty old. And I have different kind of age-related decline already happening, medication. I've got about 15 different drugs I'm taking. You know, that kind of problem is
Right.
cropping up. So I'm aware the physical decline is the first thing to catch up to me. While recognition, cognitive decline is probably less significant with me. Or other losses, I can't think about what other losses. So I don't
Because
remember.
this is the forefront of your mind right now.
Yes,
The physical decline. Yes.
yes. Thank you.
Good. One more.
I I grew up having cerebral palsy, so mobility has always been a challenge, let's put it that way. But as I've gotten older and developed arthritis, it's become more of a challenge. And I actually, for my knees, went to QC Kinetics, and it did help a wonderful lot. But now I've developed arthritis in my ankle. And it's like, where does it stop?
Where does it stop?
And I also dread the day that I can't drive.
Yep. Okay. So are you old enough to remember the old Geritol commercial? That just popped into my head. I think the tagline was, if you've got your health, you've got just about everything, right? Or if you flip that around, if your health is declining, nothing else really matters, right? If you can't do the things that, I mean, if you'd like to be socially engaged and you can't drive or go to the places where your friends are, well, then obviously that physical decline is a key issue. All right, so let me talk a little bit. This is not, I mean, I teach a whole class on aging for a semester, but we're going to go through a few of these points here. As you age, as you already know, there are changes that you need to deal with in your body's appearance, how it looks when you look in the mirror, and also how it functions. And from my perspective, it's really helpful if we keep distinct these two concepts: primary aging and secondary aging. Primary aging, gerontologists describe this as the universal changes that are built into our DNA as human beings. We all senesce, we have senescence, a gradual weakening of our body leading to we're increasingly vulnerable to death. That starts as soon as we're fully developed in our late teens. Senescence is already happening. So it doesn't start at 65. It starts probably at 16, 17, 18. As soon as our body's fully developed, we start aging and getting ready for death. That's kind of a depressing thought. But against that background, this primary aging affects everybody all around the world. We can't get out of it unless somebody develops a way to change our DNA, which is possible. At some point in the future, humans might not show senescence, but now everybody in this room is showing senescence. And so that primary aging is the foundation. But on top of that, we have secondary aging. Secondary aging would be the things, the diseases and damage that tend to build up as we age, that are more common among older people than younger people, but they are not part of aging itself. They're added on as an extra layer. Well, we can't really do much about primary aging, but we do have some control over secondary aging because most of those diseases are affected or influenced by our lifestyle, by what we eat, by what things we expose ourselves to, and so on. what behaviors we engage in. And certainly the damage from the environment is partially under our control. Why does our skin sag and wrinkle as we age? Part of primary aging. But if you want to speed that up, what would you do? Spend a lot of time in the sun or smoke cigarettes. Both of those speed the wrinkling of the skin. And so that would be the secondary aging on top of the primary aging. Same thing with hearing loss. Everybody, there's presbycusis, which is the age-related hearing loss built into primary aging. Everybody is going to lose some high tone frequencies as they age. But if you expose your ears to loud noises, I was in a rock band all through high school and college. And so if I would have known then what I know now about the effect of noise, environmental noise on hearing, I would not have done what I did. But I didn't know that then. Okay. So if you want to lose your hearing faster, expose your ears to lots of repeated loud noises, and that secondary aging is going to pile up on top of primary aging. As we age, we also, the process of aging brings changes in the way we relate to the environment around us. A lot of you have noticed that your body doesn't move the same way as it did, and that means things like climbing stairs or walking long distances or lifting things. We have to adjust that. We have to adjust to these particular changes. And a lot of you have noticed already that driving is not as easy as it was, especially at night. On that particular note, I have to make a reference to my wife's mother. My wife's father died when he was 75, and my wife's mother lived to be 103. And so after her husband died, she lived in Detroit. She drove all around Detroit during rush hour, taking soup to people who were sick and that sort of stuff. No problem at all. She came to live with us in Holland. She got lost every day. That's a reflection of a good hippocampus, which is involved in storing long-term memories. When she was younger in Detroit, she had learned the street networks, the road networks really well. And she had a poorly functioning hippocampus by the time she moved to Holland and never was able to master the direction that she was going. She got wound up in Saugatuck more times than you could count. Okay, so when she was in her 90s, she said to my wife, her daughter, "My car is my best friend." And I thought, that's kind of a flippant thing to say. She's got lots of friends, lots of family members, but she really believed it because it was her independence. And so she finally had to give up her keys at 97. She drove until she was 97. And then she lived 6 more years without a car and really did not like it. She really loved that car and loved the freedom of being able to get in the car and go anywhere that she wanted to go. Household tasks, right? I'm a gardener, and boy, does it hurt my back. After a few hours of gardening, I can hardly move. That's changed the way I relate to the environment. Aging also changes the way we relate to other people, in part because of the sensory losses, right? The loss of hearing, the changes in hearing. By the way, the loss of high tone frequencies is not really an issue with appreciating music. It probably won't affect your ability to enjoy music at all. But what does get hurt with the loss of high tone frequencies is speech, understanding speech. Because many of the speech sounds, I'll give you an example, S, K, T, say that, S, K, T. A lot of high frequency energy without, your vocal cords don't vibrate, so you don't have low frequency energy conveying that sound. And so those sounds disappear when you lose your high frequency hearing, and that makes it more difficult to understand what people are saying. And that also changes the enjoyment that you get from being with your friends, right? Because if you meet your friends in a restaurant and they're having a conversation and you can't understand what they're saying, that's going to make you less likely to go back the next time, right? So the loss of hearing is a big factor in the loss of social connection and social relationships. But aging also brings a change or changes in the way we relate to ourselves. Every time I look in the mirror, I can't believe that that's the same person in the mirror, because I'm changing and changing and changing. But it's not just appearance as well. It also changes the way we think about our future and our goals and our plans, and even what kind of person we are and what we want to achieve at this point in our lives. Cognitive challenges. Several of you mentioned that cognitive challenges were a concern for you. One of the things that I've already mentioned is that our way of taking in information from the outside world, in order for us to think about the world, we have to know what's happening. We have to be able to see and hear and touch the things in our environment so we know what to think about. Taking in this information, most of you have noticed already in your 40s that you can't see close objects as well. The big change, and if you don't have macular degeneration or glaucoma, the big change in vision is mostly changes in the lens itself. It gets stiffer, thicker, more opaque. And many of you have already had cataract surgery. Every time I go to the ophthalmologist, he says, well, you're about 5 to 7 years away from cataract surgery, but it just keeps bumping it. But eventually it's going to happen. And that, of course, affects driving as well, because cataracts increase glare. And so night driving is much more difficult for people who have the beginning stages of cataract formation. As I've already mentioned, there are changes in your hearing that involve being able to take in information, whether it's from the television, or have you noticed that people are using captioning? Even young people are using captioning because they can't understand the words that are being spoken on the television programs. Okay, what's a particular concern for me is your ability to think rationally. There's the stereotype that older people get taken in by scams, right? Because they're not thinking rationally. Somebody calls them on the phone and says that claims to be their granddaughter and she's in trouble and wants you to send money and take it down to an ATM and put money in the ATM because she needs. Why would you believe this? But a lot of people do, right? A lot of people lose money because they've had some changes in their ability to think rationally about problems. Now, I'm an experimental psychologist, gerontologist, and so I've done research on what actually happens as people age. And what we find is that on average, if you don't have dementia or cognitive impairment, you can think really well. You can solve problems really well up into your mid-90s at least. It's going to take more time because the aging brain slows down. And so if we want fast responses, do not go on Jeopardy where you have to press the button because you'll get the answer, but you'll be a little bit behind the younger people. But if you do come up with a solution, chances are your solution will be better, because you have this accumulation of experience over a lifetime. And so when you are faced with a problem, you can bring to bear these other things that you remember from your past, when this worked and that didn't work, that somebody age 20 hasn't got that experience. And therefore, although they'll be able to come up with a quick answer, it may not be as practical as the answer that you can come up with. And that's one of the definitions of wisdom, right? Practical problem solving is one of the things that distinguishes older people, healthy older adults, from younger adults. A lot of people complain about their memory as they get older, right? And what I hear again and again, people say, my short-term memory is shot. They don't really mean that, because if we look at the actual research, short-term memory holds up really well as people age. Especially passive short-term memory. That would be, I read you a list of numbers and you repeat them back immediately. That's passive short-term memory. Young adults on average can repeat about 7 digits correctly. 80-year-olds can report 6 digits correctly. That's not a big loss, right? That's still pretty good. Now, there's a little bit more of a problem as we shade into working memory. Working memory is being able to hold items in your memory while you're doing things with them, manipulating them to solve problems. So my favorite analogy for working memory is a desktop. When I'm writing an article, I like to have all of my resources on the desktop where I can see them. And I can think about them and I'm reminded of, oh, I need to include this, I need to include that, I need to include that. Well, as you age, the desktop gets smaller. And as a result, some things fall off the edge and you forget them. Or with less space, you get a new item of information and you need to put it on your desktop and it covers up something else. So even though you haven't lost that, it vanishes from your working memory. You can't have it available to think about until you consciously retrieve that information. Okay, so what you've already learned is short-term memory for you is not the problem. Don't say, I have a bad short-term memory. You don't. Also, I'm guessing you have a pretty good long-term memory. Long-term memory holds up really well all across life. Most of you can probably remember things about your elementary school. Some of you could even tell me the name of your second grade teacher right now. And you haven't thought about that in years, right? So there is a difference here that's related to dementia, and it's related to the hippocampus, between what we call semantic long-term memory, which would be your memory for facts, information that is not tagged with a specific date and time. So if I ask you, what's the capital of France? That's part of your semantic memory. If I ask you, when did you learn that Paris was the capital of France? You couldn't tell me that. But you know, you have the information stored, but you don't have it tagged with a specific time and place. That's semantic memory. Semantic memory holds up really well until you develop dementia. It's one of the signs. If you can't remember the meaning of words or what a coffee cup is for, or if I show you a picture of a piano and you can't name it, then we can start worrying about your semantic memory, and it's probably a sign that something's happening in your brain. On the other hand, episodic memory is the memory of your own life experiences, your autobiographical memory. Paradoxically, most people think, oh, sure, I can't remember facts that I learned in school, but I remember everything about my life. That's wrong. You do not remember everything about your life. Episodic memory drops off much faster than semantic memory. And part of it is interference. So if I ask you, did you take your pills this morning? When you try to retrieve that information, that's part of your episodic memory. But you're getting interference from the pills that you took yesterday morning and the day before and the day before. And so all of these memories, when you think about taking my pills, all these episodic memories come up and you can't disentangle them. You can't retrieve the specific thing that you need. So a decline in episodic memory is not an indication that you're developing dementia. A decline in semantic memory probably indicates some cognitive impairment. Okay, so if for most of you, short-term memory is not the problem and long-term memory is not the problem, what is the problem? Why can't you remember where you put your glasses or your keys? Or you missed an appointment. You didn't write it down and now you forgot where you were going today at 3 o'clock. Okay, the problem is consolidation, moving the information from short-term memory into long-term memory. So when you make this arrangement with your friend, I'm going to meet you on Wednesday at 3 o'clock, it's in your working memory. And if you wrote it down, you might be okay. But if you didn't write it down, if it doesn't make it into your long-term memory, if it isn't consolidated, we believe that short-term memory is electrical activity in the brain that disappears. We know this because if somebody gets an electric shock, they lose that short-term memory. Or if we hit them in the head with a 2x4, they lose that short-term memory. Whereas once it's been consolidated into long-term memory, we believe it's stored in the form of a molecular change within the synapses of the brain. And therefore, an electric shock or getting hit with a 2x4 doesn't disrupt your long-term memories because they're permanently embedded in a chemical change that's happened in your brain. But it's the process of getting it from this electrical short-term memory into the chemical long-term, molecular long-term memory requires a good hippocampus, a part of your brain that we know now is one of the first parts of the brain to show the effects of aging, and it's also the first part of the brain to show the effects of Alzheimer's disease. So the inability to form new long-term memories is a characteristic aspect of dementia. To a lesser extent, it's also part of our life as aging people. Normal, healthy, aging people don't have as good a hippocampus as they had when they're 20. So you can remember a lot of the things that happened with great detail when you were 20. You have much less memory for what happened a month ago because your hippocampus did not encode those memories as well into the permanent chemical changes that would allow you to retrieve it later. Okay, that's enough on that. Social emotional changes. That's a little bit more fuzzy, right? Some of you probably think, well, I could be a hermit. I could just live in my house. I don't need to see people. I don't need to talk to people. But it turns out that if you don't see people and talk to people, you're signing a check. You're losing out on the benefits that you would gain from that social activity, both in physical and cognitive aging. Now, some of these changes are forced on you by family circumstances, right? I grew up as the baby of the family. I'll always be the youngest among my siblings. But now that I'm old, I relate to my siblings in a different way. And at one point, my children were dependent on me, and they listened to every word I said. They didn't always obey, but I had a great influence on them. Now they're in their 40s. I don't have so much of an influence on them anymore. I've set them on their course of life, but they're plotting their own life. So some of those changes have to do with the relationships with your children and with your siblings, with your spouse. One of the most important changes that happens, all of us who we live long enough, if we're married or have a partner, we're going to see that partner age and die. And so if you're in a relationship, do you want to be the first one to die? Or do you want to take care of your partner and be the last one to die? My wife and I have this discussion about once a month about which one of us should go first. Yeah. So anyway, we know that our kids have been off for a long time and they love us, but they're never going to take care of us. And so we're really going to take care of ourselves as long as we can. Another thing that you've noticed already, I've noticed, one of my high school classmates sends out an email about once every 2 or 3 months listing the people that have died from my graduating class. And we're now down, we're only about 35% of my graduating class is still alive. And even my college classmates are dying off, and my friends at Hope and my friends in the Holland area, I'm going to a lot of funerals recently, and that's going to just speed up as my age group gets older and older. And that also relates to this next issue, meaning and purpose in life. Again and again, the research in social gerontology shows that people who have a purpose in life age better than people who don't. And part of that purpose comes from your relationships with your family. Are there people in your family that still depend on you, that still have a meaningful need for you, that you can serve that purpose? What about your friends? To what degree do your friends really need you as part of their friendship network? Would they miss you if you suddenly disappeared? If so, maybe your life doesn't have as much meaning and purpose as you think it does. I'm assuming that because you're part of this organization that you are mostly retired, if not fully retired, but retirement is one of the biggest shifts in this meaning purpose issue because too many people derive their identity and purpose in life from their employment. And that's especially true if you're a professional, as opposed to, let's say, a tool and die maker might have a great life and a great job, but when he goes home at night, he doesn't think about his work. Whereas if you were a clinical psychologist or a medical doctor or a lawyer, you probably spend a lot of time outside of work living out that role and thinking about those issues. And when you retire, all of a sudden you're lumped together with every other retired person. It doesn't matter what you used to be. Your new status is retired, and that makes all of you the same. You all have the same status. And in the eyes of younger people, that's not much. And so another thing that you need to learn as you age is to stop playing by the rules of young people. Don't let their evaluations affect how you feel about yourself, because they don't have the experience that you have. They can't see life from your perspective. And so don't let that eat at you. What does hurt, though, is when you have these physical or cognitive issues that prevent you from engaging in the things that you really like. So maybe you retired and then you decided you're going to develop these hobbies, or you're going to volunteer at this and this and this, and now you can't do that anymore. That's almost like a second retirement, isn't it? Retiring from your volunteer work, retiring from your hobbies, because those hobbies and volunteer roles also brought you into contact with other people. So it was part of your social engagement. And now that you had to give that up, one more step towards social isolation. And that's what should scare you, because the research is really clear. Socially isolated people do not age as well as people who have vibrant social connections. I'm kind of a loner. I could probably survive as a hermit on some desert island or something, but I know enough about gerontology to say that I would be impoverished if I did that. And so I'm trying to force myself to stay active socially just because I know it's good for me, even though I find it aversive sometimes. Okay, as my mother-in-law's case indicates, loss of independence, and that may be losing your ability to drive. It may be having your children start making decisions, financial decisions, or decisions about where you're going to live, all that sort of stuff. That is part of the process that's going to change the way you think about yourself and your meaning and purpose in life. Is there a good time to turn over financial control to your kids? Probably not. You should build in the process for them to be able to take over smoothly if necessary. But a lot of research suggests that if you go too early into this process, you could wind up making things worse by giving your kids responsibilities and access to finances that maybe wouldn't be good for them if they have a gambling habit, for example, or have other issues they're in the midst of a messy divorce. Maybe keep the financial part of it separate from but be open to their advice, be open to their suggestions, as long as you're still making the decisions about what's best for your life. Okay, now, we still have a little bit of time left. And so I'm going to give you 3 minutes to talk to the people around you about what's good about this time in life. Is there anything good? I hope you will be able to say yes, right? So in the next decades of your life, what are you looking forward to experiencing or enjoying? Go ahead. Okay, it's time to wrap this part up. Judging from the level of noise, I'd say this group has more joys than challenges, wouldn't you say? Okay, let's hear from two or three of you. Who would like to share what their group was talking about? Right up here.
I was an avid cross-country skier, and I skied all over the US and in Europe. And 2 years ago, I had to give it up. And at the same time, I took a free art class over at the Holland Art Center. And I've taken up watercolor painting, and it's something I can do now. And I've never done art before in my life, but it's a new thing, and I'm learning and doing and meeting people. And it's, I had to give up one thing, but I put something in its place, and that's been a wonderful thing.
That is a great idea. And so I want to make a comment about that. A lot of people are kind of jaded about compensating. So, okay, I lost this and I'm going to replace it with something else. It's going to be a poor substitute. But from my experience, these compensations are real compensations. They can put your life on a different direction that can bring genuine joy and satisfaction. It's not just, it's like the second best thing or just the consolation prize. It can be a really important part of your life in the next phase. And giving up skiing reminds me of the quote, "Don't play tackle football with teenagers," right? Don't play by their rules. If you find you can't do something, find something that you can do that you still enjoy. Okay, somebody else. Anybody?
I just want to say that one of the joys of aging for us after like 4 moves was coming to Holland and we're not Dutch and we have never ever imagined that we would ever live in Holland, Michigan.
Yeah.
But it's a great place to be aging. There are so many options. You could, if you want to, you can do a million different things. So I want to just give a pitch for
All right.
moving here.
So noted. And that brings up the issue that environment makes a difference, right? That if you grew up or were living in a place that was not very conducive to successful aging, you'd have to work much harder to be happy. But in a place where the environment is conducive, it helps along the process. Okay, one more person.
I think I'm plenty loud enough about this, but I find that not everything is important, and that's a relief. I think I was 50 before I ever uttered the words, "I don't care." Because prior to that, there was nothing I didn't care about and nothing I didn't think I could do better than the people around me. And so everything was important. And now everything's not important.
And that gets to the point about less anxiety, right? At some point, there is a bit of freedom, right? In not having to be so concerned about your appearance or about what other people think of you. What were you going to say, Steve?
I just want to say I have found great delight in being a grandparent. It's a lot of fun. And I've said to people, if I would have known how much fun it is being a grandparent, I would have done that before I had children. So
it certainly is a different relationship than with your own children, because if they act up, you can send them home with their parents, right? You don't have to be responsible. Okay, I have some thoughts here that a couple of interesting things happened just in the past couple of months. One was the publication of a book called Joy Span, which if you haven't read it or read about it, I'd say it'd be something I'd recommend you at least consider reading. Carrie Burnight's ideas, maybe the reason I like it is because her ideas are so close to my own ideas. And so I think you can learn some things about what she has to say. And I have a couple of comments I'm going to make in a few minutes about her general themes in that book. But also, 1 week ago today, Jane Goodall, one of my heroes, died at the age of 91. And her life, in many respects, can serve as a model of successful aging. Not all of us can spend our lives with chimpanzees in Tanzania, but the way that she lived her life could be a model of successful aging. I'll say more about that. When you get your evaluation form, my understanding is that the HASP office is going to send out a copy, a PDF copy of an article that I wrote 25 years ago about positive aspects of aging. So if you want some more depth about the concepts that I've been talking about, you can read it there. Okay, just to summarize the theme of that article, it is that there really is good news about aging. Not all the news about aging is bad. So here are some things. And I'll start with something that's partly good. The actual experience of aging is not as bad as many people think, as many people expect. So if you ask people in their 20s and 30s and 40s, what are your attitudes about growing older? They often reveal negative attitudes about the process of aging and negative attitudes towards people that are already old. Okay, but then if we ask those same people 30 years later, 40 years later, their attitudes have changed. Maybe more realistic. It's not that they think this is a golden age where everything is wonderful. It isn't. But their attitudes are less negative than they had expressed when they were younger. So the expectation about all the bad things that are going to happen when I get old usually does not come into reality. That's good news, right? So it's not as bad. Aging is not as bad as most people think it's going to be. And even better news is that we do have some control, right? Not over primary aging yet, maybe never, but we have some control over the processes of secondary aging. And that means that not only what happens to us can be influenced by our behavior, but how fast it happens to us can be influenced by our behavior. So the rate of aging it can vary over time, and it also varies between one individual and another individual, and you have some control over the rate of aging. So if you want to age faster, come to me. I can give you lots of advice about how to speed up the process of aging. But you can then flip that and delay some of the aspects of aging, push it off. And my hope is that I can delay some of these things and I'll die before they happen. And so that's a win from my perspective. Not that I can keep it from happening, but that I can push it off far enough into the future that I'll die before it happens. And some of the things might even be avoided altogether. Some of the secondary aspects of aging might be avoided altogether, at least the negative consequences of those things. And then in addition, as we lose some things, physical, cognitive, social, emotional, aspects of our life. We can make adjustments to compensate by shifting our focus, by if we, it sounds crass, but if you have a close friend who dies, is there somebody who could replace that role in your life, could become your new best friend? If so, maybe you need to cultivate a relationship with that person. It may take some work, it may take some adjustment on your part, but in the long run, it would probably be a good thing. Compensate for the things that can be compensated for. That's why I wear glasses. Since I was age 12, I learned that I can see a lot better with glasses. And so it doesn't bother me at all to wear them. Now, this is a little more controversial. No gerontologists would disagree with points 2 and 3 on that screen. But this part about spiritual psychological changes is not found universally in research. But there's enough research that demonstrates it that I feel confident about talking about it. Aging typically produces some positive changes, both psychological changes and spiritual changes in the broad sense. Let's talk about that. So are you familiar with the word introspection, looking inward? Introspection. It turns out that as people age, they become, on average, not everybody, but on average, they become more introspective. So one way of thinking about it is when you were in your 40s, you were focused on the outside world, career, family, environment, trying to make your impact. But as a result of the aging process and some of the losses, your focus has shifted inward a little bit. I hope you're still outward facing and that you're still doing things with the outside world, but you're thinking more. You have more time. And you're thinking more about what's going on inside you. And for some people, this can be negative if they ruminate on all the mistakes they made. I hope you don't do that. But you can also think back to all the successes that you had when you faced challenges in your life and you mastered those challenges. That can be a good model for how you approach the next challenges in your life. A psychologist by the name of Robert Butler coined the term life review, which seems to characterize people as they approach maybe the last fifth, 20% or so of their life. They start thinking back on their life and trying to make meaning, trying to construct meaning and purpose. So Soren Kierkegaard, there's a quote from him that says, "Life is lived forwards, but understood backwards." So your life in the rearview mirror makes more sense sometimes than when you're living through it. So some things that happened to you in your 30s and 40s, maybe you didn't understand at that time. It just seemed like this terrible thing that happened. But looking back on it now, you could say, something good came out of that in the end. I became a different person, a stronger person, a better person as a result of that adversity. Some psychologists have begun thinking about aging as, to use a biblical term, Sabbath. You work for a part of your life, and then you have this Sabbath rest at the end of your life. Not just to sit back and put your feet up and do nothing, but rather the removal of distractions, because that's one of the purposes. I, as a faculty member at Hope College, really looked forward. I loved my teaching. I loved my students, but I also looked forward to my sabbatical leaves because it was an opportunity to get rid of the distraction of all of the busyness of my life and focus on something in depth that I would not be able to do during the ordinary part of my life. So if you think about aging as Sabbath, that's a model. Okay, in what way could you see this era that you're in right now as a Sabbath from work? Going back to Greek and Latin again, aging in a sense is the end of life. It's the finis, it's the finish line, the end. But it's also the telos, or the destination, the goal. So I think it's more helpful, rather than to think about aging as the end of everything, that aging is the destination for which you have been headed since you were 16 or 17. You've been headed towards this destination. Why not make this a good destination? Don't make it a bargain basement budget tour. Make it a really good destination, and with proper planning, you can get there. Some psychological research suggests that as we age, we don't change our fundamental personality. It's not true that young people are liberal and older people are conservative. Not true. There are plenty of aging liberals. What is more true is that aging accentuates the core personality traits we've always had. And so when we think about that, this is part of the freedom, right? The less anxiety because we can be ourselves for the first time. We don't have to put on some kind of face for other people. We don't have to put on a mask or play a role. We can be ourselves. That we've earned the right to be who we really are and not have to pretend to be somebody else just to make other people happy. And I've got another kind of theological analogy here. Thinking about life, the arrow of time, it only goes in one way, right? We don't get younger, we get older. And life in that sense is like a one-way street. And it's a one-way street with walls on both sides because you can't even stop and park and watch other people go by. You're always in the flow, you're always moving along. And if we think about the end of our life as hitting the wall, okay, what good is that? Hitting the wall cracks us open and reveals what's inside, right? Peels away the false layers that we've put on to make other people more impressed with us. And so at the end of life, when we hit the wall, we can be ourselves. We can reveal the true character within us. Now, if your true character is pretty sketchy, maybe you don't want to crack open. But for most of you, I hope what's inside you is really worth seeing. Okay, painting, okay? There's some good research that suggests that as a group, not everybody, but as a group, older adults are more open to beauty in nature, art, music, literature, spirituality. As I said, not everybody moves in this direction, but there's kind of a general trend. And I think it's partly a removal of distractions so that maybe you have time to sit out there at 6 o'clock in the morning with your cup of coffee and just commune with the rabbits in your yard or something like that. Or take a walk in the forest that you didn't have time to do when you were raising your own kids. Now you can appreciate some of that beauty. Or you can take up painting or whatever else might trigger your sense of beauty. There's also a very meaningful shift in the way people see time. And the way I would describe it is that when you're young, you see life as an endless highway stretching out in front of you as far as you can see. Only a little bit of life is behind you, lots of life ahead of you. Now, what does that do to your perception? Well, it makes you realize that time is cheap. You got lots of it. And therefore, you can waste it and nothing's lost because there's always lots more time ahead. How does that change when you get to be 70, 80, 90? Your time is limited. You look at the road ahead and you realize there's a lot more behind you than there is ahead of you. It really changes the way you think about your life and the time of your life. And one of the things it does, it helps you realize that each moment is precious. You don't have a lot of those moments that you can just waste. And so you should be doing something that's meaningful in those moments, something that brings you joy, joy span, not lifespan. Okay, so practical tips if you've been keeping up with how to age well. You found that most of the advice that you're given falls into these 6 categories. Exercise, keep your body in the best shape you can. Eat a healthy diet, get as much sleep as you can. And that's the problem for a lot of people who just can't sleep as well as they get older. Keep yourself mentally active. That's not going to be the cure-all for everything. You're still going to have this declining hippocampus, but at least you can stave off some of the worst effects of cognitive decline by keeping your mind active. Avoid social isolation by trying to stay engaged with the people around you, friends, family, make new friends, come to HASP, that sort of thing. And then to the best of your ability, manage your stress. Why? Because cortisol, one of the stress hormones, damages the hippocampus. There was one interesting study that was done during the Bosnian conflict where Navy pilots were making runs, just day and night because there was a limited air support. They had to fly combat missions again and again and again. They measured the size of the hippocampus with an MRI in these pilots before combat and then 6 months later, and their hippocampus shrank just in that period of time as a result of the stress of being in combat. Now, my stress is not as great as theirs, but if there are ways that I can manage my stress and reduce the concentration of cortisol flowing through my bloodstream, that's going to delay the effects of hippocampal aging and make it more likely that I can remember where I put my keys tomorrow morning. Okay, I'm almost out of time here, but I wanted to share a couple thoughts from the book Joy Span and also from Jane Goodall's life. If you read the book Joy Span, you'll find there are 4 main themes in there. This author is arguing that to age successfully, you need to grow every day, every year. Maintain your sense of curiosity, maintain your willingness to learn. HASP is one of the best vehicles in Holland for doing something like that. And it also provides social stimulation as well as intellectual cognitive stimulation. All we need are tests, right, to help strengthen your hippocampus a little bit more. I've already talked about this numerous times. Adapt. You need to adjust not only your behavior, but also your goals. What is it that you want out of life? And how can you adjust your behavior to attain those goals, given the changes that have occurred in your body, in your brain, in your social relationships? Give. This is related to your purpose in life. Find ways to help other people. And so resist that tendency to just do pure introspection, only thinking about yourself and what's going on inside your body, but instead keep an outward focus. How can you be of service to others? Because being of service to others makes your life meaningful. It's not the only way, but it's one of the ways to make meaning. And then, of course, social connections. Maintain and add friendships, and the main thing is avoid social isolation. So whatever you could do to keep being that hermit is worth trying. Okay, that's from Joy Span. This is from Jane Goodall's life. What do you know about Jane? Well, she started working in her 20s, and she worked for 60 years in the Gombe forest in Tanzania. And then she kept working and traveling, giving talks, writing books, until the day she died. She was active. Now, we don't all have to be that active, but that's kind of a model of how, if you're physically healthy and cognitively intact, keep doing something that's meaningful, keep doing something that's contributing to the world. And that relates to, what did Jane do? She started a project that she thought was worth doing, and she stuck with it. She had a reason for being, for getting up in the morning, for enduring the hardships of living in that kind of environment, because it gave her life a sense of purpose. And then it helps if you're an optimist, right? You can't, if you're a pessimist by nature, you can't force yourself to be an optimist. But if you can nurture that sense of optimism, that hope for the future, even in spite of whatever challenges that you're facing, it would be a very good thing. Jane published her last book just 4 years ago. It's titled The Book of Hope, a survival guide for trying times. So she lived her life as a life of hope. I think she would have fit right in Holland, right? Okay. Now, here are a couple of maybe more idiosyncratic things I'd like to leave you with. And that is, I get really irritated when young people convey or express these negative attitudes towards aging. I get even more irritated when older people express those negative attitudes towards aging. There's no reason for that. Do not send your friends birthday cards that accentuate aging or make fun of older people. It's not funny. Do not reward the greeting card companies for making cards that demean older people, right? Just say no. So write a letter to your friend. Don't buy a greeting card that makes fun of aging. Also, I think it's helpful to reduce the emphasis on chronological age. A quick example, okay? As a developmental psychologist, I can say a lot of things about 2-year-olds that would apply to almost every normal 2-year-old. I can say fewer things about 20-year-olds because already lives have started to spread out like a fan. And by the time you get to 80, there's almost nothing you can say. You can predict the person's hair color, but that's about it. I can predict that their high tone frequencies are going to be poor. I can predict that they're going to have a stiff lens. But other than that, some 80-year-olds are in nursing homes. They're completely dependent on others for their care and feeding. Other 80-year-olds are in the Senate or in the Supreme Court making decisions that affect millions of people. So there's a wide variety here. So treat people as unique individuals. Yes.
Regarding that, I don't want to be disagreeable,
Okay.
but I think that part of the reason younger people have a lot of resentment toward older people is because older people keep living longer and taking up a lot of air in the room.
Right.
And they're waiting for their turn to be important and significant themselves. And they're not having an easy time of it. And I really feel like, as a baby boomer myself, that people, I think you talked about people being afraid to give up their
Yes.
significance. And I think it's really important to have a little humility and step off the stage and mentor
agree
younger
completely.
people and let them have the place.
Okay, I don't want to put myself up as a role model of anything, but I was thinking along those same lines. When I was 67, I was in really good health, and I knew that I could continue teaching for another 2, 3, 4, 5 years or whatever. But I chose to retire at 67 after 40 years at Hope, nice round number. Partly because I knew there were young people just out of graduate school who needed my job, and that getting a job at Hope College would make all the difference in their lives. And why should I had proved everything I needed to prove. Why should I hang on to that job and prevent another person from having it when I had already made my contribution? So unfortunately, I'm going back to teach. And in January, I'm filling in for one of my colleagues who's on maternity leave. So I will be going back in the classroom, but it's not taking anybody else's job away by me being there. Okay. Another thing I think you ought to do is not just try to stay socially active, but try to avoid socializing only with people your own age. I think that it's really helpful to try to get into some intergenerational groups at church, in community organizations or something, because I think those interactions can give you a different flavor for what's happening. And maybe it can give the younger people a better attitude towards older adults. And finally, recognize the continuity of life. We're changing, we're aging, but there's something essential that stays the same about us as people and what we want out of life and where we're going in life. Recognize that many of the changes are superficial. Okay, I'm going to leave you with one quote here. You can look up Philippians 3 if you'd like to read it. It's one of my favorite Bible passages about the journey of life. But I want to read this quote from Martin Luther at the bottom. For we are always traveling and must leave behind us what we know and possess and seek for that which we do not yet know and possess. I love that imagery. We're always on the road. We're always reaching out for something and leaving behind something. We're leaving behind what we know and already possess, and we're reaching out for something new. That's going to be a little bit uncomfortable because it's new and we don't have it yet, but that's where we're going. We're reaching out for that. Okay, thank you for listening. This has been a good chance to talk to you.
Thank you, Tom. Really, really informative, but also just very, very helpful. So thank you. Thanks for being here. And yeah, it's 28 after, so enjoy the extra 2 minutes.
How about this? Those of you that need to leave, how about if you leave? And if any of you have questions, I'll stay 10 more minutes to answer your questions.
Okay, we have a question right here.
I'm wondering if your research, your studies, whatever, the people you've known, it's your lifetime,
Yes.
find that the higher up you are on a skill level, the harder the fall is, even if it's a little bit, because it's not possible to get old and not, I mean, professional athletes are retiring by 30 because they clearly aren't playing, most of them aren't playing the game they played at 18 and 20. Because I think I watched my husband, who never had a memory. He was much older than I. I met him, I was 23, he was 44 after I knew him for a while, and realized he had no memory. I said, well, the good news is if you ever get Alzheimer's, nobody will notice. And when he stopped playing golf somewhere between his mid and late 80s, because he was an excellent golfer. He was still playing better than many people, but he said, it's just not fun.
Right.
And I'm feeling that with my brain and what my brain will do. And I'm wondering whether that is something you have found sort of universal.
Okay, two things. I thought the question I thought you were going to ask is, if you're at the peak of your abilities, do you lose it all or not? And it turns out the answer to that question is that overlearning, skill expertise is great, because if you go above the average in your knowledge or skill, you're not going to go all the way to the bottom. You're going to decrease with aging, but you're still at 80 going to probably have more expertise or skill than somebody age 30 who didn't have those opportunities or genetic ability. But in answer to your specific question about retirement, people that have the highest profile jobs in general fare the poorest in retirement, because they're used to the status. Their identity is even more tied to their job than most people. So it's easier for a bricklayer or a tool and die maker to retire because their status was intermediate. Somebody that was a corporate president retires, that the being thrown into this pool of everybody having the same retirement status is going to hurt that person more. It's going to be harder for that person to adapt to the loss of status. So that's right. Anybody else?
I'd just like to tell a little story, because you were talking about giving your assets over to your children.
Yeah.
And my ideal of how that can be done was demonstrated by my father-in-law and my husband. My father-in-law was an attorney who did a lot of estate planning. And my husband is also an attorney and a retired judge. And my father-in-law lived to be 96, and he had a long time to think about. He had 6 children who didn't always get along. And how were they going to make this work?
Mhm.
So my husband was they planned this estate for like 3 years, and they had the best time doing it. It was like they'd get their heads together at a table and make a plan. And it was like almost like a bonding experience. And they passed that estate through without any, and plus all the other kids knew that this was happening. It was beautiful to watch. And when he passed, it all got distributed and nobody fought, and it was delightful. And it can
Yeah.
be done.
The key is communication, right? So if different parts of the family are trying to keep secrets from the other parts of the family, you're setting yourself up for problems. Yes.
Tom, my son and your son played in a band together in
They
high
did.
school. The name of the band was My Friend Licorice.
Mhm.
I am curious, what was the name of your band?
I think I'll pass on that particular question. Remember, it was the 60s, and I don't want to go on record. If you talk to me privately, I'll tell you the name.
Yeah.
Okay, other questions?
We're here.
I think I just saw
a study or some information on a study this morning that talked about equity and wealth differences in aging. And literally, I believe the number was people in lower income economic strata lived 9 to 10 years less on average. Is that due just to medical care, or?
It's a whole stream of things that are starting from childhood on. If they have a lower income at 70, they probably started out in a relatively impoverished environment compared to the people that have higher incomes at 70. So you've got a lifelong set of circumstances that are accumulating. But even at 70, if we were to take away all the assets from half of the people who are retired and give those to the other half, we would see an immediate difference in access to healthcare, in diet, in ability to join organizations like HASP, in where you live, in the amount of violence that you're exposed to, and so on. And so fundamentally, it isn't that money changes things, money changes the environment that affects the rate of aging. And so I think, I don't want to get into politics here, but one of the things that I'm really concerned about is Social Security. And the fact that my wife and I, I've been teaching about aging since 26. What do you think we did with our finances? At every stage along the way, we knew what was going to happen in retirement. We put money away. We lived below our means in order to be able to save for retirement. And so now that we're in retirement, we don't need Social Security. We could live without it. And yet the government is paying us the same as people who are living on Social Security because they didn't either have the opportunity or the wisdom to set aside their own savings. So we can't blame them if they don't have those resources. But the fact that they don't have their resources means that their life has challenges that my life does not have. So money makes a difference. It sets up obstacles to living well, to aging well. You can overcome them, but it takes a lot more work without the financial resources. So if we could distribute the resources more evenly, we would raise the total life satisfaction of the population. No question about it. Is that going to happen? No. Okay, we've used up our 10 minutes. Thank you very much.
Again, Tom.
Okay.